In this video, we're going to cover installing the Steam version of Retroarch. So one of the more interesting developments over the last year or so is that Retroarch has been released on Steam. It's a modified version of the program found on PC to begin with, where you can't actually download cores directly within it thanks to Valve's downloader policies or something like that. But it is able to utilize things like Steam Cloud and remote play together and things like that. So it's a really interesting take on Retroarch. It's not one that I personally use a whole lot, just prefer the regular edition personally, but I can see the appeal and what this brings to the table. But I wanted to show you all how to get it set up regardless. So let's dive in. Alright, so this is going to be covering the PC version of Steam. I'm not sure if this is even available on Mac or Linux Steam, to be honest. So this is just specifically for PC. But anyway, launch into your Steam account. Go to the store page, hit the search bar, and type in Retroarch. And then you'll see it right here. Once the page is loaded, just press the play game button, and it will get it downloaded into your Steam library. Alright, so after you get Retroarch installed, just go ahead and find it in your Steam library, right-click on it, go down to Manage, and click on Browse Local Files. Now, you might be asking why we're doing this. Well, the Steam version of Retroarch actually really sucks. It doesn't have the online updater, it doesn't have the core downloader, it's missing a lot of features from just the normal desktop version of Retroarch, thus making it very unintuitive to get set up. So what we're going to do as a workaround is head over to retroarch.com, click on the download tab, find the download for Windows, find the download for the 64-bit version, and once that download is finished, get it extracted. Now open up the new Retroarch folder that you just extracted, and copy everything from it into your Steam folder. And then when it asks you to overwrite the files, yeah, do it. And once everything is finished copying over, you can just close out of that downloaded Retroarch folder, delete all this stuff, we don't need it anymore. And then we can also close out of the Retroarch folder for now. Head back into Steam, and just launch into Retroarch. But now when we load up Retroarch, we're able to get all of the benefits of the Steam version and the standalone desktop version in one. We got cloud saves, but we also have restored access to the online updater, the desktop menu, and this is just very beneficial to the end user. This is kind of convoluted, I know, but this is better in the end for everybody involved. But now setup is going to be exactly the same as the standalone PC version. So I'm going to let my video from yesterday take over from here for a little bit, and we'll mix in some Steam related stuff when the time is needed. If you have a controller that you'd like to be using on Retroarch, you can go ahead and get it plugged in. So for example, here is my Power A Fusion Pro 2 series controller. Gets brought right up, and I'm able to navigate the menu with it. Google Stadia controller, there's that working right out of the gate once it installed the driver on the Windows side. And then a PS5 DualSense controller also working straight out of the gate within Retroarch. A standard Xbox Series X controller. So as you can see, most things will work straight out of the gate. I'm just going to go back to my Power A controller here. But as you can see, when you first start up Retroarch, it opens up in a windowed mode like this. So the first thing that you might want to change is to make this full screen, and this is a super simple fix, just press F on your keyboard. And there we go, Retroarch is now in full screen, and we are able to navigate the menu and everything using either our keyboard or a controller. So let's just go over the menu navigation here real quick. So there's the main menu, this is where you will load up your games, load up physical discs if you're interested in such things, as well as give you access to the desktop menu, which is great for playlist organization, the online updater, information about our systems and cores, config file override type stuff, and then, of course, quitting and restarting Retroarch. Then we have the Settings tab. This lets us change a number of things for these various options. We'll go over these a little bit more as needed. Favorites tab, History tab. If you want to use Retroarch as a front end for your images, music, and videos, those tabs are available as well. A NetPlay menu. And then our Import Content menu is for making playlists. Then we have an Explore tab, which will break down your games based on developer, year of release, and all kinds of other various factors. I actually don't really like the Explore tab. Like, it's a cool thought, but it causes some issues sometimes. And then new to 1.10.1 and onward is the standalone Cores tab, which we will go over more in a bit as well. But anyway, going back up to the main menu, let's dive into the setup process to get this program running how we would like it. Step 1, go to the Online Updater. And from here, we are going to update core info files, assets, controller profiles, cheat if you want to use cheats in some of your cores, databases, overlays. Then you can download the GLSL shaders if you want to. We don't really need these, but more on that in a bit. So, after you get everything downloaded in the Online Updater, let's head over to the Settings tab here and mess around with some drivers. So we're not going to mess with the input or controller driver, but head down to videos. So by default, Retroarch uses an OpenGL driver, which is fine. But if you want to get more performance out of Retroarch, go ahead and open this up and change it over to Vulkan. As long as you have a graphics card from the last 6 years, you will be able to utilize the Vulkan backend, get better performance on a number of cores. Some cores do require Vulkan. And for anything that doesn't actually support the Vulkan driver, it will roll back to OpenGL automatically. Now, if you are using an integrated Intel iGPU, Vulkan will not work for you, so you will want to leave this on OpenGL or change it over to DirectX 12, 11, something like that. Unfortunately, those iGPUs for Intel CPUs just don't play nice with Vulkan. Next up, the audio driver. X Audio should be fine. Some of you might not get audio out under X Audio, so you could change it over to Direct Sound or Wasapi and see if you get audio output then. If you already are getting audio output, I just recommend leaving it on X Audio. Next, let's go down to the menu driver here. So by default, Retroarch comes with this switch-like Ozone menu. Some of you might prefer the XMB or the simplistic RGUI here. So if you want to change it, this is where you do so. I'm going to leave mine on Ozone because I hate the XMB. Next up, the video tab. There is actually quite a bit here that you can play around with if you have specific setup needs. For example, like CRT switch resolution. If you have your computer hooked up to a CRT on a separate video output line, like, you can switch over to these resolutions, which is pretty great. Makes for a good arcade box, but not something you're really going to need if you're just sitting on a normal LCD, LED, OLED monitor. But let's just go ahead and skip over to the stuff we're going to need here. So first up, head into the Scaling tab, and this is where you can enable integer scaling if you want to use it. So integer scaling is awesome because it makes everything scaled up by a perfect integer for the pixels. That way it reduces shimmering, the image will look a little bit cleaner, but it can result in black borders around every edge of the screen, which might not be preferable to some. I personally like it and tend to use it. And a new option that has been added since my last video is to overscale the integer scaling. So this way it will scale it up another integer, but this can result in clipping on certain titles and certain cores. The severity of this will depend on the game and the core, so it's fun to mess around with. You could get rid of those black bars, but you might lose some of the top and bottom of your screen. And then the aspect ratio, leave this on core provided for the best possible experience. Or if you really want to force everything into your preferred monitor's resolution, you can do so here. Aspect ratio, rather. Next up, synchronization. Scroll down to automatic frame delay and turn this one on. This is a new option that's been added to recent builds of Retroarch, and it helps reduce input latency. You can further refine frame delay here, but for most of you it should be fine just leaving it on 0 and turning it to on. If you have a stronger computer, you could also turn on hard GPU sync. This may reduce performance, but it's a good option for those of you susceptible to input latency if you have the PC to run it. And then finally, if you are running a FreeSync or G-Sync monitor, you can enable G-Sync and FreeSync here. Now, if you are on a lower end system, you can enable threaded video. This will help give you back some performance, but will increase input latency to a degree. So if you are on a faster CPU, you could just leave this option off. Next up, by linear filtering, this will blur your image, getting rid of rough pixel edges. I really do not like this option. I'd rather use a shader personally, but it's here if you want to give it a try. Then there's also video filters available here. I don't typically tend to use these ones. I prefer shaders instead, but there are some options in here that are pretty interesting, but do note that these do come with a performance hit attached to them depending on the effect that you choose. Then just a quick note on controls. If you head into the input tab and head down to port 1 controls, you can see all the buttons that are mapped to your chosen controller. And then you could change between different input devices here if you have them selected based on the player. And then same thing with player 2 and so on and so forth. And then you could also see what your hotkeys are assigned to, so it's worth going in here and looking at what all the different hotkeys do. So quick saving and loading of states, fast forward, rewind. You can set it all right here. Now, latency tab. We've already gone over hard GPU sync, automatic frame delay, but we could also enable run ahead mode to reduce latency. Now this option will require a more powerful CPU, as you are basically running 2 copies of the emulator to get better input latency. And then you could set the number of frames to run ahead here. The number of frames you want to run ahead is really going to be dependent on the core of the system that you're running. Not all cores support run ahead, but again, if you do not have a fast enough computer to use run ahead, this will just result in performance issues and a bad time. So you're going to want to really test this with your games, see if it works, see if it's helpful. If not, turn it back off. Next, head down to saving. This might be of interest to some of you here. So you can have Retroarch automatically save states for you when you leave a game, and then automatically load them when you start a game back up. Makes for a really streamlined experience, honestly, unless you really like seeing the main menus loading things up. You can think of it like Quick Resume on Xbox. And then you could also have it increment the save states index, so that way you will just have save states every time you exit a game. So I mean, if you want to like revert back to a very, very, very previous save, like you could turn this on and do that. And then you could set the max number of save states it could create, 0 being unlimited. Like, it's a pretty cool option. Great if you want to have saves at a number of different places throughout a game for recording or some other various purpose that you might think of. Next up, frame throttle. So if you want to enable a rewind function, you could do so here. Next, you could set how many frames to rewind per step. So you could set this all the way up to full 60 frames, 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, 700, 800, 900, all the way up to 32,768 frames per step. Personally, that's a bit extreme, so I like to set this around 5-ish. But then you can set the buffer size here in megabytes. So let's go with 500 megabytes for rewind buffer size. And then you can change the buffer size step. But enabling rewind does cause a performance hit, so if you don't want to have any performance impact on your games, probably best not to use this. But then you could set the fast forward rate here as well, slow motion rate, and then enable G-Sync or FreeSync again if you haven't already. Next up, on-screen display. On-screen notifications. If you don't want to have those notifications pop up in the bottom left of your screen, you can disable them here. User interface. Menu item visibility might be of interest to some of you. So for example, you can get rid of different things that you might not want to see, like the Explore tab. It's not really that useful sometimes. If you don't use favorites, you could turn that off. You could turn off image, music, videos, if you don't plan to use them. Next, accessibility. If you want to have text-to-speech narration turned on, you could just enable this. And it will start giving you text-to-speech of all the options. Next, Achievements tab. So this will let you enable retro achievements if you have a retro achievements account. Can enter your username, password. Can enable or disable hardcore mode. So hardcore mode basically means it turns off all advanced emulation features like save states, rewind, fast forward. Leaderboards. challenge indicators. You can have an unlock sound, take a screenshot automatically when you unlock an achievement. But I love retro achievements, so I like to enable the option. Next up, the user tab. If you want to stream your Retroarch gameplay directly to different streaming services through Retroarch, this is where you can do so. So you can head in here, go to accounts, you can link your YouTube page, your Twitch page, your Facebook gaming page, and then again, retro achievements. And then you can also set a username here if you're going to be doing netplay. And then in the privacy tab, you can enable or disable Discord presence. So if you want everyone on your Discord to know exactly what you're playing, you can do that right here. And that's everything we're going to cover for basic setup. Again, there's a lot more to really dive into here. This is just to help get you started. Like things like AI service, really cool things, but not easy to get set up at first, and not really essential to getting up and running. So things like this, I'm hoping to start covering in different videos. This is just the absolute basics at the moment. But once you have everything in your settings tab set, head back up to the main menu, go to configuration file, and save the current configuration. So that way, every time you load up Retroarch, this is what's going to greet you. But once you have the config file saved, just go ahead and restart Retroarch for all the changes to take effect. So now when Retroarch is restarted, you can see that it is a lot more streamlined here. Not as many extra menu things that we might not be using, so really helpful. But one more thing, after changing your video driver, you can head back into the online updater, and you will want to update your Slang shaders. These are the shaders used for the Vulkan backend, so these are the ones that you will most likely be using. But with basic setup of Retroarch out of the way, let's talk about actually getting it ready to play our games. So most cartridge-based consoles will actually run straight out of the gate. You're ready to go with things like NES, Super Nintendo, N64. But CD-based systems and some cartridge-based systems do require BIOS files in order to play them. And BIOS files will all be stored into your system folder. So inside that Retroarch folder, there is a system folder. And this is where all BIOS files go. Now, to find your system folder on the Steam version of Retroarch, again, you can just right-click on Retroarch in your Steam library, go down to Manage, and browse local files. And then you will see your system folder right there. You have to provide BIOS files yourself. It is illegal to distribute them, and I don't plan to risk my channel because y'all are lazy to use Google. I also have a number of videos on my channel showing you how to legally back up your own BIOS files if you still own these original systems. Link to this will be in the description below. Now, depending on what system you're trying to get emulated, there will be specific instructions on how to name the BIOS files. So if you head to the Retroarch documentation page, you can head to the core library emulation page, find a specific system that you're trying to emulate. So, for example, we could look at Melon DS. It'll show us what games are compatible. It will show us what BIOS files are required versus optional ones, what they need to be named, and so on and so forth. And you can do this for any number of systems. So, for example, PlayStation, you can head in there. You can see the BIOS files we need, what they need to be named, and what they accomplish. So, I'm going to go over BIOS files for specific systems in the specific core setup vids. This is just a broad overview to help you get started. But a link to the Retroarch documents page will be down in the description below. You could go through here, find the systems you're trying to emulate, see what BIOS files it needs, and go from there if you don't want to watch any of my other videos. But once you have all of your BIOS files sourced, you can just drag them into the Retroarch system folder. Now, some systems like PSP, GameCube, and Final Burn Neo's High Score DAT can actually be downloaded directly from the Retroarch servers now. So if you plan on using Retroarch for PSP emulation, GameCube, Wii emulation, head into the online updater, and you can go to the core system files downloader. And from here you can download things for Dolphin, PPSSPP, the Final Burn Neo High Score DAT, and a number of additional things for systems if you're going to be using them. So you could download extra folders for PR Boom, Scum, just a bunch of different ones here to help you get started out. You might still need some additional files even with these folders for these standalone cores. I'm not sure, I've never set them up, but definitely helps out. But with all the BIOS files in place, we're ready to actually get our emulators. That kind of took a while to get to this point. I care more about the initial setup. Honestly, it's more important because that's the part that people have trouble with. But in the online updater, you will see the core downloader tab here. And you will see that there's just a crap ton of different systems and standalone things that you can download. So for me, for Arcade, I like to use Final Burn Neo. Also for Neo Geo emulation, I like to use Final Burn Neo. Atari 2600, Stella, Atari 5200, A5200. 7800 is Pro System, Jaguar, Lynx, Commodore 64, DOSBox, Intellivision, Super Graphics, Citra, Melon DS, Same Boy, MGBA, Dolphin, Nestopia UE, Boopin 64 Plus Next, BSNES, Virtual Boy, Philips CDI, Dreamcast, Master System, Genesis, Game Gear, Sega CD, 32X, Sega Saturn, ZX Spectrum, Neo Geo CD, Neo Geo Pocket Color, PlayStation, PlayStation 2, PlayStation Portable, 3DO, and those are the ones specifically that I use and cover. There's a crap ton of other options, of course, so download what you need, and you're good to go. But now we can load up our content within said cores. So one method of doing so is to head into Load Content, navigate to the directory that you have your games stored in, choose a game, choose a core, and then it will just load right up for you to begin playing it. And then if you had your Retro Achievements account connected, you can go into the Retroarch quick menu using F1 on your keyboard. You can see different things like the achievements page here. The quick menu also lets you change core options for different systems, as well as enable video shaders. So for example, we can load up a Slang shader here for CRT. Can load up CRT, let's see here, where to go. CRT Royal is one of my favorites to use for a lot of systems. Shaders are totally personal preference, so you will always just go through and see which ones you like for yourself, but I really like this one, personally. But again, I will go into more core-specific settings in individual core videos. This is, again, just the basic overview. Now, if you would like to make playlists for all of your game content, you can head over to the Import Content tab, and you could either do a scan directory or manual scan, depending on what format your games are stored in. So, for example, if I head into Scan Directory, head over to my emulation page here, I could do a scan of my Atari 5200 Games playlist folder, and it will find all my Atari 5200 games nice and easy. However, if I try to do a scan directory on, say, my 3DO games folder, it won't find these correctly. So it'll do the scan, it'll try its best, but it won't work. So in this case, you'll want to do a manual scan, choose that content directory, tell it to scan this directory system name, navigate to the system you're looking for. You can choose the default core for that specific system. And then make sure you have scan recursively on if you have the game separated into subfolders. And if you're doing a system that you have zipped up, make sure you have scan inside archives turned on. And then you can start the scan. And then that way all of your games for that specific system will appear right there. We'll do more about playlists in all the individual core videos as well. Again, basic overview. Another option for doing playlists on the PC version of Retroarch is to press F5 on your keyboard. And that will bring you to the Retroarch desktop menu. And then from here you can add in new playlists, you can make any playlist you want, and then just directly add in the files or folders of your games. And then you can also use this to add thumbnails to your games really easily. But again, we'll go over this in more specifics in individual core videos. Another nice thing about it is it lets you know if you have your BIOS files present or not. Now, unfortunately, one of the downsides of doing this method for Retroarch install on the Steam version is that whenever the Steam version gets updated, it's going to overwrite some of your files, turning it back into that restricted Steam version of Retroarch, unfortunately. So, case in point here, I went ahead and revalidated my Retroarch install just to show you that this will happen sometimes. So after an update, when you try to run Retroarch, you'll see that you have the old version again. So like we have the managed cores instead of the online updater. We don't have the desktop menu or anything anymore. But all of your cores and everything you've already set up to this point will still be okay. So technically you don't really need to do anything. But for example, like we could still boot into GameCube games. But if you'd like to return it to the standard desktop version of Retroarch at any time, you could always just go back into your local files. You can either re-download the 64-bit version and replace all the files like we did before, or you could head down here to the nightly builds, go to the Windows tab, x86 64, and you could download this Retroarch update file down here at the bottom. So once it's downloaded, get it extracted. Open up the folder, open up the other folder, and then just copy all the files that are inside of it into your Steam Retroarch folder, and then tell it to replace the ones that it needs to. And then you can just close out of everything again and delete that. But now when we go back in and launch from Steam, we'll be back on the most up-to-date standard desktop version of Retroarch once again. So just a way to get the full version of Retroarch back every time Steam updates it. Unfortunately, disabling Steam automatic updates is not a very simple task that I'm feeling confident going over. So this is my workaround for now. But that's going to do it as far as Retroarch for Steam setup is concerned. You're basically just going to get it installed on Steam and then replace it with the standard desktop version. That way you get full functionality plus Steam Save Cloud support. As always, if you happen to have any questions, feel free to ask in the comments section below, and I will do my best to try to help you out. But big thank you, as always, for watching. Even a minute of video on my channel really helps us keep it going, and that lets us bring content like this to all of you. So, I do have a couple of huge favors to ask here at the end. If you haven't done so already, please hit that thumbs up, thumbs down button, just depending on how much you like today's tutorial. And do hit that sub button and notification bell so you can see when new content comes live on the channel. Loads to come, and I'd love to have you all along for the ride. For anyone interested in further helping support the channel, you can also check out that join button here on YouTube or the Patreon link in the bottom right hand corner of the screen. A little goes a long way to keeping this place up and running and bringing this content to all of you. But until next time, my wonderful internet peeps, you all stay awesome, keep on gaming, and we'll see you back next video.